Hi, I'm Sean.
I'm Rhonda.
And we want to talk with you about some predictors of divorce, some things that we want to make sure are not present in our relationship so we don't find ourselves or wind up in a bad place in our marriage.
Yeah, these are 4 things that you want to avoid in a healthy relationship. So when we talk through these things, think about, am I doing this? And to what extent do I do this? And what might be the impact of this on my spouse?
So these could be characterized, there are 4 different behaviors. 2 of them could be characterized as weapons, and the other 2 as shields. And this is going to be referring to the way that we are interacting with our spouse, usually over conflict.
So this comes from the research of Dr. John Gottman, where he discovered that criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling are damaging. 4 horsemen, he even calls them, of the apocalypse, because they're so damaging to relationships.
You know, the first one that we want to look at is criticism, and the definition of that is placing the blame for the problem on our spouse.
Where, have you ever felt in a relationship like you could never do anything right? Your spouse always finds fault with you and blames you. And you know, it's one thing to talk through our issues. It's another thing to point the finger at the character of the other person. And I think criticism kind of does that, because complaining is positive. It doesn't sound positive, but it is.
It's making our spouse aware of
Right.
something that needs to be addressed.
And that's just sharing information, where criticism
It's an
points
attack.
the finger. Look
Right.
at you and what you're doing to us.
Right. Making somebody feel like that you can't do anything right. Now, it's one thing to use I feel statements. This is how I feel. It's another thing to make you statements. You're doing this. You're doing that.
And so this usually goes along with a harsh tone, so it definitely feels critical if we're not watching our tone and facial expressions. So if we're gentle in our tone, if we soften the way we come across, we're less likely to sound critical.
You know, and it's good to give a background for, you know, I feel this way because of this. This behavior made me feel this way.
Right. Another thing is contempt, and this one is probably the worst of the 4. And when it's seen in marriages, it is usually considered a predictor of divorce.
You know, contempt can really be looked at as mockery. It's someone that's seeing themselves as being superior than their spouse and looking at them with disgust.
It's kind of criticism gone wild all the way to the other side, where now I'm not just letting you know or make you aware. I not only began criticizing and blaming, but then I went all the way to really looking down on you, and I don't mind letting you know either.
You know, when we start making comments that are sarcastic, that are cutting, you know, I'm putting you in your place,
Name
kind of
calling.
things. Yeah, these are all going to be under that heading of contempt.
And so the rolling of the eyes, anything that basically has a belittling, demeaning feel, and it's probably going to come across as verbal abuse, especially if you've got name calling, raising the voice, the sarcastic, cutting, jabbing remarks. Don't kid yourself. You're abusing somebody when you're talking like that.
You know, we want to make sure that we're watching our tone of voice. A lot of times the words that we use are going to follow along with the tone of voice that we have. And so if we watch our tone, a lot of times we can keep those things in check.
And so this is damaging to the relationship, but also to the hearer personally. They actually have found that it affects the person's health and ability to recover even from colds and things, or sores or cuts, because they're constantly being cut down.
Wow.
And so you need to be able to hear if your spouse is letting you know that's emotionally or verbally abusive, you better hear it.
Yeah.
Because this is defined by the listener, not by the speaker.
Yeah.
And if your spouse feels like they're being verbally abused by you, and you just ignore that and continue doing it anyway, well, you're too soft. You know, that's just the way you interpret it. You're probably going to kill the relationship. And you're probably being absolutely unaware of what you're doing to contribute to the ailments going on
Yeah.
in your relationship.
You know, one thing we want to make sure that we're not making excuses for what we're doing and
Right.
think that, well, my spouse shouldn't feel that way. He or
Yeah.
she shouldn't respond that way. I didn't mean it that way, and they shouldn't have taken it that way. And that's just
Yeah.
letting us off the hook from making the changes that need to be made to keep our relationship positive and flowing good.
And it also says, you know what, I'm going to have this relationship my way. This is me and all about me, and you need to act like me, and you need to think like me, and you need to interpret me like me.
That's not a marriage, right? That's
No,
not a union.
it is not.
Right.
And it's one person bullying another person, and that's not okay. And like we said, it kills marriages.
Right. So those two, the criticism and contempt, were the attacking or weapons. And now we want to look at the shields, which are defensiveness and stonewalling. And defensiveness is really having the perspective of being a victim who's done no wrong.
You know, if you feel that you're the innocent lamb in your marriage, it's going to be really difficult for you to hear what you need to change to be able to be one, because
Yeah.
it takes two.
Yeah.
And if our spouse is giving us a complaint, not criticism, they're making us aware, that is legitimate in a relationship. We have to be able to hear those things. But if we become defensive and we start defending ourselves, well, I didn't mean that, and I didn't say it that way, then basically what we're saying is, I can only hear me. I can only see me. I can't see you. I can't hear you. I'm not interested in understanding what it feels like to be you or how I come across to you or other people.
Yeah.
That's not good.
You know, we want to own up to our part of the equation. We want to be able to accept our part of and take responsibility for what we're doing that could be damaging the relationship.
When we are non-defensive, we're not listening. Because our focus is on ourselves. What are you saying about me? What is it that you're interpreting about me? You are wrong. I'm not that way. Let me tell you how I am. Can you see that that's all about me and what I want you to hear about me? It has nothing to do with the ability to hear another person, and they're probably not talking about you. They're probably talking about themselves and revealing their heart to you. This is what it feels like to be me. This is what it felt like when you said or did this, and we need to hear that.
You know, the next area we want to look at is stonewalling, and this is really shutting down in conflict with no further verbal or nonverbal communication.
Well, we might think, oh, but this is not bad. You know, I would rather go quiet than to say something mean. Well, of course, that would be better. But stonewalling is really it's more than just going quiet. It's pushing the other person away and never really coming back to discuss our issues. It creates like that stone wall around us, and the other one is not getting in.
You know, if you become kind of like this impenetrable fortress to your spouse, and because
Right.
you've interpreted their actions as weapons attacking you, and so you've withdrawn, you know, that's got to change, where you see that what your spouse is doing is not, you're on the same team. You're not, your spouse is not the attacker. You're working together, and so you can drop the defensiveness and not stonewall. This is how we're going to repair and build our relationship.
And so if you can let your spouse know what is causing you to withdraw to that extent so that your spouse could adjust, could make a change. Hey, I could really talk to you better if you watched this or that about your, like maybe your tone, your facial expression. Or would it be okay if I interject right now because you've kind of been talking for a bit?
Mm-hmm.
But it's best not to talk about those things when it's happening, but kind of when there's nothing going on so you can really hear better.
Yeah.
But being able to calm down and not let yourself escalate to the point that you have to shut down is kind of the key there. When we notice our heart rate and our breathing rate picks up, you know, that's a good clue that I'm beginning to escalate. If I don't recognize when I'm beginning to escalate, I'm just going to escalate.
Yeah.
And if I tend to withdraw to protect my spouse from me, which is noble, but I withdraw and I stonewall, which is not noble, that's where I'll drop an issue. I'm not going to talk about it, and I'm not going to come back to it later either. Those are things we want to watch out for because they hinder the way we talk. We can think, oh, this is a good response because after all, my spouse has no control, right? So I need to get in control. But you do need to pick it up later. Just know how to play by the rules.
Yeah, sometimes we can drop an issue because we're escalated, but we don't ever come back to it. And a lot of times that can make the other spouse feel like, wow, if we don't handle it now and if I don't push through, even if it's not a good thing to do, sometimes if we come back to it later, we can resolve that and make it right. You know, if you find yourself in a situation where some of these attributes are present in your relationship, it can change. And even if it's just one party that's making the change, it would be best if both of you were, but if just one of you are making a change, it can affect the way the other person is responding to you, and just little by little you can see repair take place in your marriage.